So just a little bit about some of the equipment that we're doing. I'm trying to get my husband to do some examples. Put him on the spot. The first thing that's really important to know about is the grafting knives. Like we talked about, this is your most important tool. They are pretty spendy. One of these guys now is between $60 and $90 for a single a stationary blade. The folding ones get up to $150. We ourselves only use these knives for grafting. Do not use them for slicing your apple slices or your fruit or cutting anything except wood and grafting. So for us, we get about 2 seasons out of a knife, and then we're done. They are a straight side on one side and a curved side on the other side. The straight side is the sharp side. And it sounds crazy, but kitchen knives, the curved side is the sharp side, and we always have somebody that cuts themselves because they're pressing against the straight side. So the straight side is the dangerous one. We're also really commonly do this, and you either slice the seats of your husband's car and almost get divorced, or you reach your hand back there to grab it and run your hand across the blade. As Steve said, safety issues, you can do this a lot, banging. If you slice, you're gonna find blood. You will not feel that you've cut yourself. These are so sharp, you don't even know it till there's blood going everywhere. So like he said, we've got some Band-Aids in the middle just in case. There are several different, there's 2 things we want to point out. Lots of us as orchardists are using Apogee now to help control fire blight. This is a stick that has Apogee sprayed on it, and if you look very carefully, first of all, the Apogee will shorten your internodes, right? That's fine, but extended use of Apogee will also cause the tree to not produce buds at the nodes. So the first year we found out about this, we had actually grafted some trees, and our customer called us and was like, you know, none of the grafts took, and we went and looked at, some of the grafts didn't take. We went and looked at them, and the grafts took fine, but there weren't any buds on the sticks. There were nodes, but nothing grew because there were no buds on the sticks. So when you're collecting your scion wood, make sure you have sticks that do have grafts, or buds. I'm gonna pass this around. You can see this entire section pretty much has no buds at all. We use 6-inch sticks approximately for our scion wood, so you know that's 1 to 2 grafts right there that might slide in there. So be sure and watch that while you're grafting. You just want to make sure there's buds on there is the important part. The other thing we like to go through is proper form. So it's tempting to use your arm. We all use our wrist when we're cutting. I know I use a paring knife like that. If you use your wrist or your elbow as your strength, you're gonna get a really bad cut. So what I like to tell people is think about putting your shoulders back because that braces you. The easy thing is to say, imagine that you've just put your shoulder blades in your back pocket. And then you're gonna brace your shoulders that way. Raul holds his hand very firmly and only moves this arm. You're moving from your shoulder, not your elbow, not your wrist. If you're doing a lot of these and you start bending your wrist, you're gonna have carpal tunnel very quickly. And you lose your force, you lose your strength by bending your wrist. So your wrist is straight, it's all lined up. Your elbow is gonna move, but that's not what you're using for your strength. You're using your shoulder. So if your shoulder's back, I find as a female, I don't have quite as much upper body strength as my husband who can move anything. So I sometimes, if it's a much bigger branch, need to use a little bit of this arm to help pull it away to get a little more strength. If your knife is sharp enough, hopefully at least you guys won't have to. We really like to start directly under a bud. It just gives you a good starting place. Your knife, how angled it is away from the branch, has a big difference of how shallow your cut is. You want a long, narrow cut, if you will, that gives you an oval rather than a circle so you have more cambium layer that you can line up. So your knife is fairly flat against the branch. We also use our thumb to help guide the knife. So the thumb is on the other side of that branch holding it. If you're left-handed, you're obviously doing this the opposite side. Beveled side of the knife is up, flat side is against the branch. obviously, other way around. We do have some left-handed knives here if people are left-handed. And as we said, we prefer flat side on one side, beveled on the other, so you only have a single sharpening side. So if your arms are braced, shoulders are back, and you're just pulling with that shoulder. And I just sliced my finger. Yay. So you're looking, again, for a really straight line. This one has a long tail, which my husband never does, but you can cut that off if you need to and still have that nice, long, straight curve. Again, I'm saying an oval, not a circle. And then if you're doing the whip and tongue graft, we like to do the cut down about a third. So roughly a third of the diameter from the long end, you go over to make your cut, and it's going down through straight through the trunk. And you're doing the same on your stock, your root stock, so that those two match. You're gonna turn them around and one will go on the other. What I always do, the question was, where do you place that cut in relationship to the pith? I don't care about the pith. What I do is a third of the diameter starting on the side of the long end. So a third over, so you've got the long end, a third, and then 2/3 after that. Steve does an angled cut just on the edge rather than doing completely across, which we learned yesterday. There are actually really good reasons for that, but we will usually do one straight across on bigger scions, okay?
How large in terms of diameter can you get?
This is where we're learning things too. What we will usually do if we have something, what we generally prefer if it's half-inch, half-inch we'll still do a whip and tongue. Things like a 1/4 inch, full inch, especially if the tree is already growing, we actually very rarely will do a whip graft. Steve does whip grafts on how large? The question was how large a diameter of stock?
But it's a stock, not the stock. The sign is the same.
Right.
Whatever you got in the sign. But
So what's the largest you will do on a stock?
what's that?
What's the largest diameter of stock you'll do? 2 inches? So scion wood, we like it to be the diameter and size of a number 2 pencil. My husband, and I swear there is no reason in the world biologically why this works, but he's been doing it forever and he's right. I hope everybody heard that. He claims that one of the temptations is when you're collecting scion wood, I'm short and I'm lazy. And you can go out to that tree and you see all those wonderful water sprouts that are growing straight up, and you can get, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 grafts out of one of those water sprouts, and they're easy to collect and they're usually low where I can reach them. And my husband's like, don't get those. And I'm like, what do you mean? I can be out here for 15 minutes and get everything I need. He swears, and he's right. We've tested it where we did a couple trees with the water sprouts and some trees with just the tip branches. You get a better tree and much better fruit if you take your wood from the tips of the branches, the terminals. He just did some whip and tongue grafts. We also call these bench grafts because you're sitting at a bench when you're doing them usually. Both sides are dormant, is when we're making new trees. We will sometimes do this kind of graft if we're out in the field and a tree has died, but it's got some suckers coming up from it. Rather than replacing that tree, we'll sometimes use a sucker and do this kind of graft to get a new tree without having to replace the tree. So did we actually answer your question? When we are grafting, and we're further south, so if your trees are actively growing and they're a little bit larger, we actually prefer a bark graft where, and your sap has to be flowing, but we will actually cut a section on the bark and straight down, peel the bark back so that it's still attached. These are not slipping, but you're peeling back that green layer, and then the graft that we sent around before, that angled cut, we slide that under the bark. And then it's taped with electrical tape and then sealed with some kind of sealant. We use what's called Doc Farwell's Yellow. There are other sealants that work. This is a rubberized one that is easy for us to carry out in the field. It's easier for us to deal with it. You can also do the melted wax version. There's tree coat. There's several different things. But the Duck Fur Wells is a rubberized paint. It is water soluble as long as it's still wet. As soon as it dries, it's there. But both the electrical tape and Duck Fur Wells will stretch as the tree is growing as well, so you don't have to worry about coming back and cutting it back later. Yes, sir. Does the diameter of the trunk have any impact on the success of a bark graft? It does not really. We have done up to 50-year-old trees. What you're doing with a bark graft is you want one graft for every inch diameter of trunk. So if you have a tree this big around, you're doing 16, 15, 14 grafts. You let all of those grafts grow. The idea of that is that they are pulling the sap up the trunk. They're keeping that entire trunk alive all the way around. One or two may not take, or if they all take, great. Do not come back and cut them off. We will take 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 if it's a really big trunk, and we actually wrap those together. We did one just as a baby example. If you play,
It's not grafted, it's just an example.
yeah, it's just, if you play like this is a tree, and these 3 were grafts, you'll take the strongest one and pull the others. You'll wrap one going one way around. The next one you want to wrap in the opposite direction around. We like to cut off the non-dominant ones where our top tape is. So the bottom tape is as close as you can get it to the top of the trunk. And then this one is usually 18 inches about above the first tape. And then we cut off the branches there. Your grafts here, you're then going to get lateral branches coming out from here. You'll get lateral branches coming down here. We head the top to keep it growing straight up. And so you will often get another set of laterals around here as well. By doing this, this will graft together and become one branch. And then if there are other grafts in here that you didn't need, instead of cutting them off, just cut them shorter, but keep them there. Your grafts are gonna slowly create wound wood. It's hard to show on this, but right at the base of the graft, you will get wound wood. This is actually one that was a fake graft. So that's what it's roughly looking like. Sometimes we like to put 2 if we can possibly fit them into the trunk so that we can wrap them together and you get a much stronger graft. These do not break this direction very easily, but they will break that way. So by holding them together, you get a much stronger branch. You will get a layer of wound wood around the base of this graft if it's taken. If you have multiple grafts around, eventually they will all join and they'll make a ring around the outside that seals off that vascular tissue. Once they have completely made a ring, at that point you can remove your extra grafts if you decide you don't need them. Eventually that wound wood will grow together and will completely grow and cover your stub. So it does cover over. I laugh, the first ones he showed me made beautiful little bird nests. So every tree in the orchard had a bird nest on top of the stump. Yes, he's going to do an example. So the question was, can you still get good bark to cambium ratio connection?
A bark graft is the best cambium connection you're gonna get.
Do you want to do one that they can see without? The reason for that, first of all, he's going to do one that's not painted to show you. I also forgot to point out, this is a wonderful safety thing. It's tail wrap for horses. So you wrap tails and fetlocks with it. It comes in rolls that are about 4 to 6 inches long. We cut those rolls lengthwise to get smaller pieces. It's sticky, it's stretchy. We use this actually on all of our fingers to protect them when we're playing with these knives. And they stretch and you can usually cut them off. But it gives you that protection. So if you're nervous about the knife, or it helps protect when you slip. So if anybody wants to use that, you're welcome to it. We just brought this one little roll. When you are doing a bark graft, because of the way that you peel it off, you're sliding that scion wood directly under the cambium layer. And so it connects on one side. You've cut it in that same angle as that example that we sent around earlier. I don't know if it made it this far. So since it's in a triangular wedge shape, the cambium layer automatically touches the inside of the cambium layer on your stock, and the angle of it fills in the hole as you peel back the bark, so it touches the cambium on the other side. Because of that, it's an easier way to get the connection without having to think about it very much. And so the question was, because of the angle of that scion wood, it automatically fills that gap. So it is more foolproof. It's easier to get a take on those. It's a much faster method of doing it, but you have a very limited time frame to do it. So for us, we have about 4 to 6 weeks total, but that's only because it's about 3 weeks in an area that you have to get this done. You have to time it exactly when when that sap is rising, because you're doing this when the bark peels very easily from the trunk. So we can go 4 to 4 weeks about, but we start in the south and we follow the sap north. When we do it, we're pulling the cambium, we're pulling the whole green part away, and so we're sliding that in between the xylem and the green part. So the green part is on the bark that's pulled away from the trunk. You have cambium that's touching on the outside here, but then where the bark is cut, you've also got cambium on the inside of that cut. And because of the shape of this, that cambium is touching both sides that way. Yeah, the question was the angle of that cut on the scion wood allows the bark to fill in that blank. When we're sealing these, actually, that's the important part. As Steve said, there's 2 things that will kill your graft. One is not getting bark to or cambium to cambium connection. The other is if you lose moisture. So the other half of this, we kind of laugh because we get help from a lot of our orchards, and they put their least skilled labor on the painting side of it. And it's really interesting to see the class hierarchy that suddenly appears between grafters, tapers, and painters. Painters really should be the most important person there and the most skilled people there, because that's what's going to kill your graft before anything else. If you leave a gap or a hole in there and air gets into that graft, you're done. So you can stick that stick and get it crooked and not quite get it right, and it will still take. If you get any air into that graft and it dries out, it won't take. So sealing is very, very important. We've also experimented, somebody was asking on very large trunks. If you peel back that bark and you've got a trunk that's we've done some where we've had like 2-inch bark, you know, and you're putting a little stick like that in there, but you're leaving a pretty big gap there. There's another product over here that's this green paste. It needs to be warm, but it's this green stuff. You can use this as your sealant and spread it over the whole thing, or we will also make little balls of this and mash it into that gap between large bark, thick bark, so that your paint doesn't go down in there, and that keeps the paint from accidentally blocking the scion cambium touch. Okay, so that's sometimes useful for that. And we also do say come back and check your paint to make sure it hasn't cracked, to make sure things haven't settled and spread out. And we didn't mention it, we also will paint the tips of those grafts, the scion wood, to make sure you don't lose too much moisture out there. If you're doing a complete changeover, so a complete top work, so that you're removing all of the branches, which is not what we're talking about doing today, but we do leave a nurse branch. So your lowest branch stays on the tree that first year. That way it helps to siphon off any extra sap that might be too much sap to get to these grafts, and it makes them too wet so they can't connect. The other use for it is that helps pull the sap up the tree. Yeah, because you need kind of that push-pull thing for sap to rise. We also highly recommend, we were discussing the other night, and I don't remember what consensus we came to, whether y'all have ambrosia beetles up here or not. No. We have a problem in Virginia with ambrosia beetles. They are a borer, and they have been there, they're native, and about 10 years ago, they suddenly decided they like apple trees. And they're attracted to any tree that has, they're host trees that have got a lot of stress, and so they're putting off ethylene. Well, if you chop off the top of a tree, you've just stressed your tree. So after we started having problems with that, everybody must cut off the top of their tree in the winter when the trees are dormant. And that way the plant has set off its ethylene gas at the time when the beetles are not active. And then when we come through and graft again, we do a final cut in the springtime, a fresh cut. They will actually be at that cut within about 5 minutes if there's any in the area. Right, because we're cutting the trees, when we're completely removing the tops of the trees, we're cutting them when the tree is dormant. So we need a fresh cut when we're doing this bark graft. The nice thing about these sealants is they also seal off that ethylene gas. So as soon as that paint is on the tree, ambrosia beetles go away. But the ambrosia beetles will bore into the tree. They're very obvious if you catch them, if you see it in time. As they're boring in, their spit mixes with the sawdust and they make these little toothpicks that they push out behind them. So you'll see the tree with all these little pointy things coming out of it. Then they plant a fungus that only they carry, and that fungus will kill the tree, and there is no fungicide that will kill that fungus. So we have to be very careful now about not getting those on there.
You don't have it here yet.
You do not have it here yet, no.
I have passed another sample. This is another type of graft. It's called a side graft. So you got a small diameter tree instead of a bark graft. You can do this now.
Yeah.
You can do that as a winter.
Could you guys hear him? Everybody heard him? Do I hear a no back there? This is another example of what's called a side graft. So we use these for a smaller diameter tree, and these can also be done when it's dormant. So you can do this kind of graft now. And you're cutting an angle in the side of your stock, and then you're using that same stick with that same wedge cut to push into that, and then again it's taped and sealed. Somebody asked about buds, and I'm not sure if you were asking about breaking dormancy on buds, breaking dormancy on the stock, but what we do find is when you do these grafts, either if you're doing a complete top work, or even a lot of times if you're just doing one branch, you've cut off that terminal bud on the branch. So we do get a lot of your dormant buds will break dormancy on the stock after you've put the graft in. Those you need to remove. It's easy to run along right when they break dormancy and just rub them off when they're still teeny tiny, rather than waiting for them to grow out. What bud growth stage is when the bark is slipping the best. For us, we usually find we're either in flower or in pink, kind of depending on the variety of tree.
Anybody ask me, all the customers we got, when will you be here? I said, well, it depends on Mother Nature. Pink stage. And when I say pink stage, they, okay, that they get.
It varies a little bit from tree to tree, but generally for us, it's around mid-April, early April, early-ish, usually about the first week of April. Down south, we can sometimes hit in the end of Georgia. But again, it depends on your weather, it depends on the time of year, the location. So the question was, how do we know that our scion wood did not store well?
The first sign is mold or shrivel. Mold or shrivel.
If it dried out, your bark is going to shrivel up and you'll have little vertical lines on your stem. If it was too wet, you got mold on it. Sometimes we'll find like round dark lesions just under the bark. So you still want it to be green when you cut into it. You still want it to be soft. So you know if you're trying to cut a stick that's dry, it's hard to cut. He cuts them and can kind of squeeze them, and a little bit of you can see some sap in it. Also, when you're collecting it, you're trying to collect it from the healthiest, best trees. We don't want to, if you collect it and it's got fire blight in it, you've just spread fire blight to your new tree. That's not advisable.
A special thank you goes out to our partners who made this work possible. Be sure to check out our other videos for additional information, and thank you for watching.